Good morning. I hope everybody had a happy New Year and New Year's Eve. I thought it was funny. So so I was outside. It was pretty crisp. I was outside. I wasn't watching any of the stuff on television for New Year's Eve. I don't care about all that stuff. And I'm sitting there just trying to have some quiet reflection, and then I can hear all the gunfire. Pop, 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 pop. And I was just like, number one, that's a lot of money that's blowing up in the air, you know. But number two, it reminded me about being in Iraq. That's how they celebrated everything, you know. Birth, death, you know, holiday. People would go outside, and, you know, and here I'm in a first world nation. I'm in America, and how people are celebrating in my neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky, but going and firing rounds up in the air. Have they never heard what goes up must come down?
Why do you think they hold it at an angle?
Yeah, but anyways, so, but that was interesting. I don't usually stay up that late either, and so that was way past my bedtime. All right, we are in John, and John chapter 11 and 12. I've been breaking them down in two chapters, but this really is going to be a split in the outline. We have John chapter 11, which is still part of Jesus the True Shepherd, and then it goes into John chapter 12. This is a transition, the triumphal entry or the king on the cross. And that section goes from 12 to 19, and then after that we have chapter 20 and chapter 21. Chapter 20 is an important passage on the author's explanation on why it was written. And then we have in chapter 21 this very really intimate conversation that we have with Jesus and Peter. But the book isn't divided up equally amongst time. John chapter 1 through 11 is really interesting. The time period on which is occurring, Jesus arriving on the scene, and to this point in chapter 12 is taking place at around about 30 to 33 months. But really, when you see it is the time frame in the very beginning, John chapter 1 verse 1. This is before the creation. So it's really a really long period of time covered here. But then the last part is really only happens in 2 to 3 months. So it's a very condensed part. It gets really into the focus of Jesus' time coming into Jerusalem and his death, burial, and resurrection. All right, we're back to Lazarus. We went over this briefly last week, and I asked the question, why is this only recorded in John? This even in secular circles, even in amongst the world, most people know the name Lazarus. It's made its way into pop culture. They make movies about it. They rap about that name. They sing about that name. They know that name, and when you say coming back like Lazarus, okay, people understand that you're coming back from the dead. So as important as this story is, why is it only in the Gospel of John? Theories.
Because each person had their own style of writing, and this was John's style, in which he would mention Lazarus.
Okay. John's style. Anything else?
Everyone else was there, correct? Not just John, the other gospel writers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't have an answer for that. I thought maybe the
Jesus did this one in secret.
No, I just, that, I don't know.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, all Lazarus, I mean, it spread really quickly about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. So everyone at that time just kind of knew about it. And I think maybe it's because John was writing to people outside who didn't necessarily know the name Lazarus, who weren't specifically Jews, that he decided to write about this because everybody else knew about Lazarus, but these people didn't know. It wasn't a name that they knew. So.
John is really being written to those individuals that did not have a first-hand account. And if you read in some of the commentaries, one of the things they bring up is the fact that Lazarus was so well known. So when you're having a gospel written to Jews that were in Jerusalem, that had seen this, experiences, witnessed, heard the testimony of Lazarus himself, because Lazarus was there. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were planning to kill Lazarus as well, because of this miracle was being undenied. Right? So these individuals that are greeting the Christ into the city of Jerusalem, and jumping a little bit ahead, but they're laying down the palm branches and they're saying Hosanna to Christ, which is to save us. They're calling for his saving, and they call him the King. They think he's going to come in and he's going to conquer Rome and he's going to free them. They're calling for their salvation, but they think that they're literally calling for their liberation or salvation from Rome. Well, the Jews knew this story. They knew Lazarus. And yes, it is really important. But when you've gone through years now of persecution, when people have been put to death, they've been martyred for the cause of Christ. This story, which might have had a little bit less significance, and let's be honest, Jesus Christ's resurrection is in all the Gospels. That is the significance. That is the significance. Okay? In comparison, this is not that big a deal. But in John's style and his purpose and his audience, writing this to a group of non-eyewitnesses, of people that have now seen their loved ones slaughtered for the cause of Christ, for the faith that they've given. Okay, they haven't rescinded it. This story now has a little bit more significance. It has a little bit more oomph, if you would, to these individuals. Now they also, what I was going to come back to, what I mentioned in the commentaries, what you'll see is they say that this was widely known and the other Gospels might not have written about it because they wanted to take the life of Lazarus. And during the other Gospels, Lazarus was still living, and that would have been their cue to go kill him so that he wouldn't have been be able to testify. I don't agree with that, in the sense for the Jews already knew. However now, if you're talking about to the non-believer, you're talking to Rome, you're talking to the Gentiles, I can see that in the commentary, but that's not what they emphasize. They emphasize the Jews want to have him put to death. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke might not have covered it because out of respect and love for Jesus' friend Lazarus, for him not to be put to death by the Romans. I don't know. That could possibly be it. If it is, it's a minor thing. The major thing, and this is the important thing, is that, and this is why I say that might be a minor thing, and I disagree with it, by the way. Because Lazarus, I believe, would have gladly laid down his life for Christ, just like any of the other disciples. I think maybe even more so. Hey, I've been there and done that. I'm totally okay with it. So, but I do think that it comes back to the point of especially in the story, and you have the two women and how they respond, Mary and Martha, and how they're responding to the death of their loved one, that this is probably why, again, this story is being given to us, that we may believe. And John is also focusing on this. This is a prelude. This is a tasting. This is a introduction to what's about to happen. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay. But that you will, and the reason why I bring that up is because you do have a idea, a pushing of that the Bible is full of contradictions. Those that don't believe, those that even do believe, but they don't believe that the Bible is the inspired Word of God, and so it's just all literary art form, and it's the way that people express God and how they knew Him at that time, and all this other nonsense. They'll point to this and they say, well, why isn't Lazarus in every other book? Well, the issue is every book is different because every book has a different author and every book has a different level of importance. And if you see and you read some famous person's autobiography or their biography, you read it, guess what? It's going to be a little different. Because people are going to have different significance and importance that they're going to place in this person's life. Okay? They're different. They're not all the same. But they're still all true. Historians and history books. Just because they left out something that happened in history doesn't invalidate that history book. It just means, like the author of John says, if everything was recorded, there would not be enough books in the earth to contain it. And so this goes back, and this is going to be in the lesson today a little bit, about this word martyr, which means witness. These are eyewitness testimonies given by these gospel writers. And now Luke's is a little different. Luke is a recording of eyewitness testimonies. Okay? Luke wasn't there. Luke didn't see it. Luke didn't witness it. But he recorded eyewitness testimonies. He'd be like an investigator or a detective getting all the evidence to present. And he does. He presents it to an individual. Okay, whether you believe that's an individual or whether you believe that is, the body collective. But regardless. Anyway, so that's why I emphasize that and ask you the question, why do you think it's only recorded in John's Gospel?
Yes, the short answer would be because the Holy Spirit. I mean, really,
Yeah.
that's the short answer.
The short answer is because God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get back into this again. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and his sister Martha. And it was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Now, question here. Okay, it says, it was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. Which Mary? Which woman? If you can think about this in two ways. In the gospel accounts, you have this happening in Matthew chapter 26, verses 6 through 13, Mark chapter 14, verses 3 through 9, John chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, and Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 49. Let's start with Luke. Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 49. Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city, who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at his feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her hand. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who is touching him, for she is a sinner." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." So he said, "Teacher, say it." There was a certain creditor who had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing to which to repay, he freely forgave them both. "Tell me, therefore, which of them will he love more?" And Simon answered and said, "I suppose the one whom he forgave more." And he said to him, "You have rightly judged." Then he turned to see the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman anointed my feet with fragrant oil. Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little." This he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." And those who were sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Then he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." So there's that story, but we're not told who she is. And then we have Matthew chapter 26, verses 6 through 13. And when Jesus was in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head. As he sat at the table, but when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work to me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do this not all. But me you do not have always. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did for my burial. Assuredly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in this whole world, what this woman has done with you also will be told as a memorial of her." But again, it says a woman. There it doesn't identify her. He keeps calling her woman. So again, and I bring this up, and then let me see here. I'm going to skip ahead. John chapter 12. John chapter 12, verses 1 through 10. Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with fragrant oil. Now, it's important here to know that there are differences. There are similarities, but there are differences. And it could be that the individual in Luke is not this Mary. It certainly could be. There are similarities, but there are differences. And the woman is given. Before I say that again, it doesn't give the name of the woman in Luke. It just says woman. Nowhere in that passage does it say Mary. So that could be a different woman. The one in Matthew's gospel identifies that he was in Bethany, and it says a woman. It identifies a woman. I don't have Mark in here, but I believe it's the same thing. A woman identified, but not a name. But then we have John. Now I think it's important again to understand and harmonize the Gospels that two things can be similar, okay, but not the same thing. We understand that, right? So there could be two women that had similar occurrences with Jesus, but not be the same woman. And we can have two stories that are described that are similar, but like we just said, certain things might be highlighted over another. But it's the same occurrence. If you all we celebrated the holiday in this country, Christmas, and you might have gone to a family gathering. And if you were asked to give a short synopsis of that gathering, and everybody else that was at that gathering was asked to give a short synopsis, guess what? It's going to be a little different. The thing that you thought was the most important, maybe someone else doesn't even mention. So again, that doesn't discredit the Gospels. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's just highlighting or putting the important things on there. I think it's important to understand that the writer of John is writing this after the occurrence. This is many years after the occurrence. I say that not to say that he could forget things. He didn't. The scriptures guided him. And he wrote exactly what he was supposed to write. What I'm saying is he's writing this, and he's identifying the person for something that they haven't yet even done. In John chapter 12, 1 through 8, we see Mary doing this. So it very well could be, he could be identifying at this particular point a future occurrence. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. We don't see any weeping here, just like we don't see any weeping in John chapter 12. Why would she be weeping? Her brother is alive. Where you see in Luke chapter 7, the woman's weeping. You know, those could be two very different things. You know, the woman in Luke chapter 7 is not identified. So go ahead.
Is it just for the reader's reference? Like they would know this story of the woman who anointed and wiped his feet with her hair, and he's just referencing her as Mary, so they make that correlation?
I believe that this is a reference.
Okay.
But I do not believe, myself personally, that it's a reference to a past occurrence. I believe that this is a reference to a future occurrence for the reader. So in the future, when he identifies her, you call back to this.
Okay.
It's kind of like, I believe that it's a Holy Spirit footnote, so that the reader understands it has a context. Okay? Now, verse 3. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. Now this word is where we get the word Philadelphia from, brotherly love. This is philo. This is his friend, but this is a friend that he loves as a brother. Okay? And it says, when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness is not unto death. This is the Greek word thantos, which, by the way, it's bringing in a cultural reference. I don't know if this is where Marvel got the name Thantos from, you know. But if you watched Endgame, what did Thantos do? He snapped his fingers and made half of whatever die or something. I don't know. It's the same way Nike means victory, and yet they put it in a shoe. I don't know. But anyways, this word Thantos means death, but it can mean death, physical or spiritual, by the way. So, he said, this is not a sickness unto death, but for the glory of God, and the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved, this is a different word here, this is agape, this is a selfless love. Okay? So we see that he has more than just a selfless love for Lazarus. He has a brotherly love, a friend. And he also has a selfless love for Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place that he was. Does that make any sense? When you read it on the surface level? Okay, one question for you. Did Jesus lie? It's an important question. He said this is not a sickness leading or unto death. This is not a sickness unto death, but if you see in verse 14, then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. People will ask this question. Did Jesus lie?
No, he didn't. He knew what he was going to do. So he made.
Well, he knew what he was going to do, absolutely. But he said, this is not a sickness unto death. And he dies. Dun, dun, dun. Goes back to the Greek word thantos. There is a way of saying something. Let me give you, okay, like Star Wars. I'm going back, for some reason I'm geeking out and having all these kind of pop culture references. In Star Wars, right, they didn't know what they were going to do, and when they did episode 1, they intended to make Luke and Leia a love interest, but then the guy who wrote Star Wars, his wife was like, no, let's put a twist and let's make them siblings. And then you get to that point, and you know, and then you get to that point where Luke is speaking to the ghost of Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan, he's like, you told me my father was dead. He's like, well, in a particular way, yes, he was. He was no longer your father. The guy, what was he before Vader? Huh? Anakin. Annie. He was Anakin Skywalker. Anakin Skywalker died and Vader took over. And the person that I knew was no longer. So, looking at it from a particular point of view, I didn't lie to you. Okay? But they didn't know, and so they were playing it by the seat of their pants and stuff like this. That's not Jesus. He knows exactly what he's going to do. That's why I brought up that reference. But there are two forms of death. And Jesus right now is telling them that the death that he's going to suffer is not a death that you should be concerned about. This is a knowing death. This is a death that comes to us all. Okay? All of us are appointed to death, and then after that, the judgment. Jesus is telling them that this is not a death, this is not a sickness, this is not a sickness of sin leading to a spiritual death, but this certainly is a death leading to physical death. Now, and again, he says, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Okay, we're going to come back to that and talk a little bit about that. Because again, Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen to him too. And he's going to die, and God's going to glorify his Son. Okay? So I want you to think in your mind as well, the time will come when you or your loved one will die, and there will come a time where Jesus too calls you out of the grave to the glory of the Father, to the glory of the Son, to the glory of the Spirit. Your resurrection story will come too. You might have to wait a little longer than 2 days or 4 days, but it will happen. Anyways, so now Jesus loved these individuals. He had a selfless love. Yet he stayed 2 more days. I want you to think about that. Why did Jesus tarry? Why did Jesus wait? We're going to answer that in the next section. But does this sound like a person who loves? Mike, if you said, I'm in desperate need, help me so bad, I need this help immediately, and then I wait 2 days before I respond. Or wait 4 days before I respond. Are you going to be feeling the love?
No, I probably won't.
Probably won't. You're probably not going to be feeling the love, right? So we'll talk about this and explain this, why this is. Verse 7. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and you're going there again? They thought they should be in hiding. They don't have an army yet. We're going back into Jerusalem. They're just us. We're not warriors. We're fishermen. What are you doing? Okay? Verse 9, Jesus answered said, Are there not 12 hours in the day? And if anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of the world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. These things he said after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. I see this, and we recently rewatched during our Christmas break, during the fall break. We watched Lord of the Rings, the first one. By the way, that's like the 20-year anniversary of that being completed. We watched that first one when we were, just together, and it's just like, oh man, this is getting old. We're getting old. But I kind of, in my mind, I try to see the story. I try to envision it. And I imagine in here, Thomas, like Samwise Gamgee. And he's talking to Mr. Frodo. And they're going into the land of Mordor, and it's bad. And they just know they're going to die. But he's like, okay, Master Frodo, I'm going with you. And he goes with him to the end. I kind of have that imagination in my head. I'm not saying that's exactly how it was. But at this time, Thomas is like, we're going to Jerusalem. Okay. We're all going to die. I warned you. I told you. But he's your friend. You're going there to die because he's your friend. We're going there to die with you too. I see it as kind of a little touching, myself personally. I mean, you could possibly also see it as a lack of faith, because this is emphasizing how they viewed the kingdom. I can just see them going, when are we going to get the swords? When are we going to start training? When is our montage going to happen? And we're going to get ready for battle? How is this going to happen here? We don't understand. So they think they're going there to die, right? And again, he's explaining to them, Lazarus is sleeping. This is the kind of way that God views our death. Okay? He views it as sleeping. And I think there's a comfort that we can see in there. Jesus saw his friend, his brother. He saw him as asleep in rest. And I know, trust me, there's going to come a day. There's going to come a day where someone that I really, 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 really love. And I can't imagine a second of my life being without them. And I'm going to have to come back to this in my mind in this passage of Scripture and say, my wife is asleep. She's resting. But that's how we should view death if you die in the Lord. Because if it's not a sickness leading unto spiritual death, then there's comfort in that. And the Thessalonians were reminded of that. They were comforted of that. They were sleeping. They were resting. So, anyways, questions, comments, thoughts about that? This is back to the uniqueness. This is where we see the 7 I ams. I am the resurrection and the life in chapter 11, verse 25. The witnesses of Christ, we see Martha witnessing of Christ in verse 27, that he is the Christ. And there is certainly, and I didn't put it on here in the bottom here, but there is certainly omnipotence, all powerful. Okay? This is all-powerful God here on display. Verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been dead in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined that woman and Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, and Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" And she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Again, I go back to the question. Why did Jesus tarry 4 days? Thoughts, questions, comments? Discuss.
He waited 2 days, right?
Well, this is now 4 days. He tarried another 2.
It took 2 days for him to get to where they were at this point.
1 day travel to him,
Uh-huh.
1 day travel back.
Okay.
But he tarried 2 days in between.
Okay. To make it more, I don't want to say more believable, but more profound, because you were talking earlier to me about the Jews didn't, or what, have you heard that? They didn't embalm. And so this person had been dead 4 days. And so he's bringing back, and it's graphic, a decomposing corpse from the dead. And there would be no question that it would be.
Well, okay, there certainly is no question.
Mike has.
Go ahead, Mike.
He wanted to give glory unto the Father, not unto himself.
Give glory to the Father, not unto himself. Now, specifically, Bethany is just a short jaunt away from Jerusalem, and that's why we have this emphasis on if we go there, we're going to die. But in this particular passage, and this is according to when I looked at this in the commentary, that when Jesus received this at Beth Bara, it says he was about 30 miles away from Bethany, which is a day's journey. So the messenger is day 1. The messenger comes to Jesus. Okay, Jesus tarries 2 days, and then he goes. Okay, and this is now the 4th day. And, oh, by the way, before I say that, and his emphasis on the time, and when he says, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem," or "I'm going to go to my friend, and I'm going to resurrect him," there's 12 hours in a day. And this is an emphasis on his ministry is short. He's at the 12th hour. He's at the 12th hour. It is about ready to become dark. But as long as there's light, as long as there's time to work, he's going to work. That's that emphasis on that whole 12 hours of the day thing. This is the end of his ministry, but he's still there. There's still light in the world. He hasn't died yet, so he's still got to work. But, so, it's reasonable to believe, right? It says he's been in the tomb 4 days. He only waited 2. 1 day's journey. Lazarus died the day the message was sent.
Yeah. He waited 2 days because Jesus is going to be in the tomb for 2 days and rise again on the 3rd.
When the message got to Jesus,
Sorry.
Lazarus was already dead. I can't tell you how many times I've had people bring up this passage of Scripture and use it as an example of Jesus not caring. Okay? Especially when they're in grief and they're in sorrow and their loved one just died. Okay? Jesus tarried. Jesus waited. And you look at Mary, you look at Martha, and what are they saying? They're saying, Lord, if you had been here. And again, what is he supposed to be? They confess him to be the Christ. If you would have been here, if you would have been the king in Jerusalem, if you would have already quashed and put down these Pharisees and Sadducees, if you weren't out there building your army, if you would have been here, he wouldn't have died. But guess what? He didn't even need to be there. He could have said it. We see that also in the other Gospels, right? He healed people that very hour. Okay? The Roman who comes back and he says, when was my son healed? And they said at this hour of the day, and he knew. That was when he spoke to Jesus. When this message got to him, he was already dead. Lazarus wasn't suffering. Lazarus wasn't agonizing for 4 days. Lazarus wasn't agonizing over those 2 days. Lazarus was dead.
His sisters were grieving, though,
He was resting.
for that time.
Oh, yes.
And so I think, I don't want to jump ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think that lends into their anger, Martha and Mary's anger. Not only did he not speak it, and he could have, to fix it. Not only did he not come right away, even if he wasn't going to speak it, to see what was going on, he also hasn't come up into this point to come and console them. They are mad.
But don't we see that today also in people today? Christians, people that profess Christianity and actual Christians. When they're suffering, where was God?
Yes.
You're omnipresent. You're omnipotent. You're omniscient. Where were you? My wife died. If you had been here, she wouldn't have died. Did Jesus have to receive the message to know that his friend Lazarus was sick?
No.
No. He knew. Go ahead.
Unless I'm missing the question that you're asking, it seems that verse 14 explains everything. It explains that he, it says, then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. I am glad for your sake that I was not there. Now, I don't know what that really means, except that to the intent ye may believe. So it was an opportunity. He's saying this presents an opportunity for me to assert God's power and prove who I am and who He is. So,
and to overcome any doubt that anybody might have been having that He is who He is.
Yeah. If Jesus had been there,
I was thinking
he wouldn't have died. Is Mary and Martha incorrect?
no.
No. He wouldn't have. But because he did, his death is now recorded to the glory of God. And so, that's why I say it's important to understand and to know that why Jesus did what he did. Why there wasn't an urgency, but also there's another thing, and we're going to talk about this, a Jewish tradition on what they believe happens to the soul after you die. And so Jesus making sure that none of the people down there could have any kind of speculation about Lazarus' actual death. But we're going to come right back here. We're going to talk more about Lazarus' death. This is a very important topic and subject. But I just want to make sure that everybody hears that and understands Lazarus was already dead by the time the message came to Christ. He was resting. He was at peace. He was asleep. And that's how we should be comforted when those that we love die in the Lord. All right. Thank you very much.